Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel. In this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. First, let's start with Avdiivka direction. We have additional reports. According to information we have starting this previous night, the Ukrainians started abandoning their positions in the northwestern part of the village and in the fields between Orlovka and Tonyinka itself. The Russians from their side continue pressure, taking one position after another following the Ukrainian forces. So as I understand, today very likely that the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will provide us additional report about the territory, and very likely the Russians will confirm that as a result of offensive operation they managed to establish complete control over the, the northwestern part of the village and over the farms that located to the west of the area. So very likely, maybe not today, but tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, this entire territory will be captured by the Russians. Furthermore, according to the Russian sources, they managed to establish complete control over the main road that goes from, the mainland, from Novosilovka Persha to Umanska and then to the Semyonovka. So very likely that Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from Semyonovka as well due to the lack of reinforcements and supply. Currently, the Russians are trying to attack the Ukrainians, between Berdychi and Orlovka, and trying to reduce the line of combat contact, trying to establish control over the trenches, fortifications, and the tree lines, in the fields. Currently, as you can see, according to this map, this territory is located either under Ukrainian control or in the gray zone, and now the Russians want to establish complete control over the territory and to finalize the battle for this defense belt. So, as I understand, very likely that maybe today, maybe tomorrow, or during the next few days, the Russians will announce about complete control over these fields as well. So as you can see, the battle for this defense belt is coming to an end. It's very interesting what the Russians are planning to do next. Either they're going to cross the river Durna and to move further in direction of Очеретивate and Solovyovo, Novosilovka Persha, or the Russians will stay on this line and they will use this area, these water reservoirs, these rivers as the Russian defense belt. They will stabilize the line of combat contact, and maybe the Russians will move their focus further to the south in direction of Yasnobrodovka, Nitailova, and Pervomaiska. Very interesting, and very likely this scenario is more likely than the Russians will try to move further. Maybe the Russians, to finalize the battle completely, will try to establish complete control over Semyonovka, and they will try to obtain the foothold on this bank of the river, and that's it. This is the only thing they're planning to do, and after that they will change their focus further, to the south in direction of Pervomaiska, Nitailova. Very interesting details are coming from Krasnogorovka direction. Today the Russian sources reported that as a result of an unexpected offensive operation, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to improve their positions around Nivoyska for additional 1 kilometer in the southwestern direction. So according to the Russian sources, as a result of offensive, the Russians managed to establish control over something like this. For now we don't have any geolocations or proofs, but very likely this is exactly what the Russians are planning to do, and as we discussed in the previous videos, the main Russian goal is to establish complete control over the road that goes from Krasnogorovka to the mainland. Now we are moving to Krasnogorovka southern direction to Georgievka. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that according to information we have, according to provided videos, the forces of Ukrainian 59th motorized brigade lost its combat capabilities somewhere in the area and decided to surrender to the Russians. And on this direction, the Russians continue offensive operation. For example, on this video we can see how the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in the village, trying to clear the passage for further offensive operation in the direction of Massimiliano and trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back. And furthermore, we got additional report, according to some Russian sources, that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to improve their positions in Georgievka along this Zhovtneva Street, or October Street. So the Russians managed to improve their positions. Currently, it's unknown where exactly the Ukrainians managed to stop the Russians, but if we, update the map according to report, very likely that currently the Russians control something like this on this direction. This is very important progress of the Russians. If with the situation is exactly as you can see right now in front of your screen, that means that the Russians got the access to these three lines, and now they don't have any barriers to start moving along this area. So the situation is about to be finished on this direction as well. The Russians are about to complete the battle for the foothold between the water reservoirs. This is going to be a very powerful stronghold, and after bypassing the territory, the second stage of the battle for the South Donetsk direction is going to start. The Russian launched artillery and aviation preparation in the northern and northwestern part of Novomikhailivka. For these purposes, the Russians renewed the bombardments of the area with FABs, with guided bombs, with multiple launch rocket systems, with Stosflame power systems. Very likely the next 48 to 72 hours, we're going to receive more updates about further Russian progress on the northern and the northwestern part of the village. I'll remind you that during the previous week, the main clashes in the area were taking place in these farms, and according to the latest report we have, as a result of offensive, the Russians managed to bypass the area and to establish additional control for another 1 kilometer to the west. So something like this was captured by the Russians during the previous week. Yet we haven't received delegated confirmations, but probably this is something like this. Now we are moving to the north in direction of Liman, Terny direction, southern Kupinsk direction to be more precise. We have very important updates that are coming from the village by the name of Terny. Starting this morning, somewhere at 10 a.m. of the local time, we got the first update that the Russians, even earlier, somewhere during the night, we got update that the Russians, continue their offensive operations towards Terny, and the Russians, there is an advance of the Russian armed forces near the southern outskirts, and according to this map, according to the arrows, we see that the Russians have almost reached the first buildings in the outskirts of the village. Later, somewhere at 11 a.m. of the local time, we received the video of Russian attack. This video was provided and published by the 60th Mechanized Brigade of Armed Forces of Ukraine. On this video, we can see the Russian personnel carrier moving towards the Ukraine position. As you can see, the personnel carrier was damaged by the Ukraine anti-tank missile. Then we see the Russian infantry start landing operation. Most of the soldiers survived, but the situation is here is very critical. We see lots of FPV drones flying above the Russians and bombing them with so everything was flying in direction of Russian forces. We can't tell for sure whether the Russians were successful or most of them got, wounded as a result of these strikes, but anyway, they appeared in a very difficult situation, very difficult to understand how many soldiers managed to survive. Maybe this is just one episode of Russian attack, currently is unknown, but anyway, we see that this video was geolocated here. So approximately, if we summarize both updates that we received since the beginning of the morning, very likely that currently the Russians control something like this. Of course, we can't make a conclusion based on, defeated Russian armored personnel carrier with significant number of infantry as a Russian progress, because it doesn't mean that it's a progress. But anyway, we see that the Russians renewed offensive and they started attack towards Terny with more pressure. And if, let's say, the Russians managed to clear the territory and establish control, then the distance between, the edge Russian positions in the first building is around 500 meters. So the battle for Terny is about to start. Regarding the losses, regarding maybe that failed attempt to attack, anyway, there were more attempts and there will be more attempts, and one of them, maybe more than one of them, will be obviously successful. And so anyway, we also have reports that one of the brigades on this direction that is responsible for protection of the territory from the Ukrainian side, the 21st Brigade, lost already its combat capabilities, and this brigade is responsible for this territory. This is the 21st Brigade on the map, military summary map, so they are located in this area, and of course it's not a very good thing for the Ukrainian and the, common defense on the territory. Now we're moving to the borderlands. We have additional reports from the territory, and the most important is that the Russians, after probably a week of clashes on the direction, decided to block the area to completely establish checkpoints and not to allow anyone, civilians and I don't know who else, to enter the territory. Now this is the area of active clashes. The access to this area is restricted, and which confirms that the situation is not so good maybe as some Russian sources report. Furthermore, when talking about the territory, we got additional updates, additional video of the use of the foreign volunteers and foreign military forces on the territory, in the clashes on the borderlines with Russia. On this video, for example, we can see the use and the work of Romanian soldiers. Romanian soldiers, we can't say that this is like regular Romanian army. This is obviously volunteers or mercenaries from Romania, but they have a separate squad, separate battalion, and this separate battalion was operating on the border with Russian Federation. So this is very interesting because we continue receiving more and more updates about of the use and the number of foreign soldiers that's involved in the battle in Ukrainian conflict. Today we got additional video of redeployment of armored vehicles, tanks through Slovakia on the territory of Poland. Some sources are saying that this is just a part of NATO exercises in the area. Some sources are saying that these are the first evidence of redeployment of the French troopers, French soldiers on the territory of Ukraine through Poland. So currently we can't confirm this information, but anyway, after the sources reported about, let's say, redeployment of French forces, we start receiving videos of some movements of armored vehicles on the territory of the European Union towards Ukraine. Furthermore, we got more and more updates, and for example, on the Bulgarian border, on the Bulgarian territory, we also have the video of redeployment of armored vehicles through Bulgaria towards Romania, and obviously later towards the Odessa region. So maybe this is also French soldiers, French forces that currently are being redeployed on the territory of Ukraine. So obviously, very interesting part is just ahead of us, and there are going to be more and more updates. And let's talk a little bit about Kherson direction. The sources published the Ukrainian defense belt in the area. There is like a very powerful lines of defense, but not so big as, let's say, in Zaporozhye or, let's say, Avdiivka direction. Now let's talk about Rabotina. The Russians are about to finish the creation of another cauldron in the area. The Ukrainians still try to hold a foothold in the northern and the northeastern part of Rabotina, but the Russians from the other side continue pushing from Raboa towards the Ukrainian positions. One side of cauldron has already been established by the Russians, and according to some sources, this approximated Russian control in the village, and now the Russians are moving from Verbova through the fields with the purpose to get as close as possible to the northeastern part of Rabotina and to create, let's say, Rabotina cauldron. Now the Russians just need to establish control over these fields. Of course, it's not like so easy like I described this on the video, but anyway, this is exactly what the Russians are planning to do. To complete this mission, the Russians first need to establish control over this stronghold in the fields, very powerful one that is under Ukraine control, and after that the battle for Rabotina will be finished by the armed forces of Russian Federation. Now let's move to some mobilization updates and some, let's say, evacuation process. Today we got additional reports about the evacuation from Sumy. Now we have two regions where Ukrainians announced the forced evacuation. The first one is the northern Kupiansk direction. Now we got updates from the Sumy area. According to Ukrainian sources, Bilapol, Vorozhbyan, Krasnopol, Maripol, Khotin, and Yunakiv are the villages, settlements, and cities that should be evacuated as fast as possible. And furthermore, we got additional video of mobilization process in Poltava. On this video, for example, we can see that the employee of the military registration and enslavement office of Ukraine beat his victim on the street in the city of Poltava. And this is the mobilization, and this is the taxes and money the West countries and West citizens of the Western countries are paying for. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.